We give honor to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. We're grateful to God for this Mother's Day, to all of those who are listening, broadcast, other means of social media. We wish you happy Mother's Day. And to this visible congregation, we've already expressed it, but we say it again. Happy Mother's Day to each and every one of you who's here as well. We honor the ministerial staff of the church. We honor the officers and all of those who are ministering in every aspect today. We give you honor, but we're grateful to God for our mothers. My mother, who will hear this broadcasting forum, we honor her in Detroit. And we're grateful to the mother of our children here with us, Sister Mills Bernice. We honor her. And we honor all who have gone behind us. To read from us verses 14 to 20.
And Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat her down over against him a good way off, as it were a bow shot. For she said, Let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him, and lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad. And the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven, and said unto her, What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the bottle with water, and gave the lad drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness, and became an archer.
In chapter 16, verse 7, it says, And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way to Shur. I want to talk about a mother in the wilderness. A mother in the wilderness. Ushers, you may be seated. Thank you so much. On this Mother's Day, as we say Happy Mother's Day to all, I need to remind some, exhort others, and comfort the few who are still caught in the struggle. I need you to understand that no matter who you are, every woman who births a child will someday spend a day in the wilderness. No matter how well your plight, no matter how great the provider your husband may be, no matter how strong the love, every mother has at least one day in the wilderness. Your wilderness may not be as clearly defined as mine. Your wilderness may not entail what my wilderness exists on. Your child may never bother you, may never worry you, may be the model and the epiphany from God of what childhood is all about, the pinnacle of childhood success and rearing. But every mother spends one day in the wilderness, worrying, wanting, waiting for some answer from God for her child. Jesus himself warns the women on his way to Calvary. He says in Matthew, Women of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for your children. Because if they will do this to a green tree, think about what they're going to do to your children as dry trees. I don't know how a mother could dismiss a child to school, bus, store, or outlet and not have some concern or thought. Will it come back like I sent it? I don't know how there could be any mother who raises any kind of offspring who is not concerned about the overabundance of trial and tribulation, temptation, and perverted moral decay, and not worry will that influence my child. Hagar provides insight that sometimes mothers are in the wilderness not only because of their children. Sometimes we put ourselves there by ourselves. Everybody knows the story of Hagar and have generally viewed her as a victim of circumstance. But before we oversimplify chapter 21, you got to look at what happened in chapter 16. But this is not the second time Hagar has found herself in the wilderness. Hagar gets to the wilderness in chapter 16 because of the fact of what Reverend Vereen Juanita preached this morning. She wanted to kind of be the instrument. She was the victim of circumstance when Sarah tried to take matters in her own hand. And here Hagar is a victim, for she's a slave to her mistress. And her mistress has ordered her to lay with her husband and bring forth a child. But when you read the text, Sarah was not upset with Hagar because she followed instruction. But in chapter 16, it says that but when Hagar saw that she had conceived, she despised her mistress. She became proud and arrogant and wanted to destroy her mistress. Message Bible says that she tried to usurp the authority of Sarah because she felt she had something that Sarah did not. And the text says that Sarah went to Abraham as the man of the house, and Abraham said, she's your servant. Do with her as you will. And after Sarah set her in line, she fled for her life and found herself in the wilderness. And in chapter 16, the record says, the angel of the Lord, in verse 7, found her by a fountain. And the rest of the discussion is that this angel told her, you need to straighten up. In essence, you need to humble yourself. You need to go back to your mistress the right way. You have become proud and arrogant. And therefore you're out here in the wilderness because you forgot what God had been doing. And because of your arrogance, you find yourself here. There are some mothers, young and old, who are in the wilderness because somebody told you you look good. Somebody told you you had it all going on. Somebody told you they'd be with you till thick and thin. Somebody rode by, dropped a few dollars, left a set of car keys, and you think you queen of the world. And now all of a sudden you walk around with pride and arrogance. You got some promotion on the job, you rolling in 6 figures, and now you don't need no man. You don't need nobody. You can make it all by yourself. Your pride and your arrogance because of a few things that have happened, you are now looking down on other women. Looking down on men. Hagar began to look down on Abraham. He old. He about to die. She looked down on Sarah. I got something you wish you had. And the end result, she finds herself pregnant in the wilderness with nobody on her side. There are a lot of deadbeat dads because you put us there. A lot of deadbeat dads because they wanted to do something, but you were so proud and arrogant that you refused to let dad be dad. I can bring home the bacon, I can fry it in a pan, because I don't want that. The end result, many men who wanted to be men could not be men. Abraham could not rule this house because he had an issue. I submit to you, mothers, that don't ever get so proudful. Don't ever get so high and mighty that you fail to understand God has ordered things for a reason. You may be on top today because you got it all going on, but there is such a thing as old age. Decaying looks, obesity, wrinkles that girdles and makeup can't hide. And if you have not put some love in the bag, well, I can come home and remember how good you were. I'll be singing happily. Ain't no sense in going on. I don't care who got her involved. We can find ourselves in the wilderness because we've got ahead of ourselves and have lost track as to what God would have. And so this is not the first time that Hagar has been in the wilderness, but because God had mercy. Because she started off as a victim of circumstance. God says something to Hagar. He says, you humble yourself. Return, because God has heard your cry. God hears her in the wilderness, but God does something that a lot of mothers don't want to hear. He tells her, you go back in chapter 16. You have that boy. You name him Ishmael, which means in the Hebrew, God hears. I want you every time you look at that boy to know God hears. God hears. Not Abraham. God hears. And whatever you need, you won't, but I got to tell you, hey God, this boy that you're about to bring will be wild. Read chapter 16. He'll be untamed. He won't be able to get along with any man. But don't worry, I hear. And I'm going to make of him a great nation. You just leave him and yourself in my hand. God tells her, you're going to have a hellion on your hand. But just remember, God hears. Some of us are in denial. We think little Johnny, little angel. Johnny done ripped more folk off. I know my child, he'll never lie. He lied when he told you he was going over to Joe's house. We don't want to hear the truth about what we have, but what God is trying to tell you. Every child, everybody will make a mistake, but the key is God hears. And for a mother in the wilderness, you better learn how to make sure you're within earshot of God. And so Hagar is out in the wilderness. In verse 16, she's found by a fountain, which indicates that God had not left her destitute, but she's found by a fountain, which signifies there's a water of life. God has left her in a position of hope, even though her pride and her arrogance has put her on the outskirt of everything. God still hears. And I want you to understand, no matter how you got in the wilderness, you can find your way back home into the safety of God if you can humble yourself, position yourself, and heed what God has to say. God can turn it around. So she's back now. And in chapter 1, God has heard. She's dealt with the reality of her existence. And so now she's humbled herself. She's taken cat and dove back home and went back. Sarah apologized, and she's been a good slave to her mistress. She's gone through her 9 months. She's been impregnated and had the baby, and the baby is now a teenage boy. And now Sarah has humbled herself, and God has opened up her womb. The text is here now. In chapter 21, God has been a blessing to Hagar. Brought her from the wilderness, gave her a child. Ishmael is being raised. Sarah has humbled herself. Brought in a boy named Laughter, whom we call the son of promise, but Isaac means laughter. He's put laughter in the home, and now I got laughter alongside with God hears. They're living in the same place, living in the same house, but there is something wrong. For even though laughter is around, naive and happy in his upbringing, God hears, is not calling on God. And Ishmael is living out not only through his name, but also through his legacy. He is wild and untamed. And the text said that he now begins to kind of tease and ruffle Isaac. He is showing that I'm the oldest, and he in the text is making fun and ridiculing the son of promise. And now we got a different situation. The mother has humbled herself, but the child is uncontrollable. And sometimes mothers get into a day of wilderness because grandma used to say 2 grown women can't live in the same house. Grandma used to say, if you that grown, one of us got to go, and if I'm paying the bills, that answer is very clear. Hagar has a problem. Sarah and Abraham are paying the bills, and her son is disrespected. So now that we've set it up, this is what happened. She is given order to leave. She's given limited supplies. She's given limited direction. And she is told to take her child and leave. Which gets us to the text. When a mother is in the wilderness, she wanders in the wilderness. Look at verse 14. Abraham rose up early in the morning, took bread and a bottle of water, gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder and the child, and sent her away. She departed, and she wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. A mother with limited supplies and no direction in life will find herself wandering in the wilderness. A mother who's trying to make it but not seeking direction from God, from man or anyone else will wander in the wilderness. A mother who's trying to define her own way and trying to do it her way will wander in the wilderness. Wander means to stagger. Wander means to reel and be found out of the way. When we leave with limited supplies from home, when we leave with no direction, we are subject to stagger and fall out of the way. Mothers, many of us have left with no clear direction. We've left the home of safety. We've left for whatever reason God's house. We've left and tried to do it our way. And at some point, you will find yourself wandering in the wilderness, going from pillar to post, wondering which way shall I go, running from affair to affair, relationship to relationship, man to man, trying to figure out what's the direction and what's the path. But what a mother in the wilderness does not understand, you're not in chapter 16 by yourself. There is a child on your shoulder. And now you're in the wilderness, wandering, limited supply, no direction, and you're not by yourself. She wanders in the wilderness. She's staggering in the wilderness. The Hebrew word and the gender derivative means that she has been caused to lose her way. She has erred and gone astray. Something has caused her to wander. And it's sad today to say, but the cause was her son. And sometimes, mothers, your child may cause you to wander. Your child may be the one that's causing the pain. Your child may be the one that's causing you to fall out of the word and the will of God. You are doing things in life that you would have never done before, but you're doing it because you say, my child gotta eat. You're making decisions and making things done because you're trying to feed and take care of your child. You don't want your child to go through what you've gone through, but you've forgotten the child's name is God hears. And instead of letting God hear your voice and your complaint, you tried to do it your way, and so you fell out of God's way. You're wandering in the wilderness. You're like the prophets who were trying to get folk to do it right. And Hebrews 11:38 said they were found in a world that was not worthy of them, and they wandered in deserts and mountains and caves and holes of the earth. You're trying to find your way in a world that's not worthy of you. You're trying to find your way in a world that does not appreciate the Christ in you. You're wondering because you have lowered yourself to a world because you claim you're protecting your child, and this world is not friendly to you. And so she's wandering, staggering under the load, staggering under the care, and not knowing what tomorrow will bring. In essence, she's going round and round, seeking and searching and soliciting and finding no answer. One can wander physically as well as spiritually. And many of us have wandered on this journey spiritually. We wandered trying to see, should we be faithful to God or faithful to a man? Should we be faithful to God or faithful to our child? Should we stand or should we fight or should we flee? Should we enjoy life because we deserve it after all? Or should we stand firm on the joy of the Lord is my strength? And as a result, we're wandering in the wilderness, wondering what can happen. And God sees you, but because God has already told you what to do and you're not doing it, God lets you wander. He says in Isaiah 28:7 that these folk have begun to wander because they become drunk with the ways of this world. So in Psalms 95:10, he reminds us, 40 years I was grieved with this generation, and said, this is a people that do err in their heart and have not known my ways, so I let them wander. Maybe you're still in the wilderness wandering because you refuse to let God be God. You refuse to trust in the Lord with all your might. You refuse to let God hear. And so you continue to wander. Mothers who do not know the ways of God will wander in the wilderness. And don't get me wrong, all of us have gone astray. According to Isaiah 53:6, but all of us don't have a child named God hears. Sometimes maybe God is trying to tell you, you're in the wilderness, but you got to remember, I named your child. And every time you looked at him, I wanted you to remember, I found you in the wilderness by a fountain and named your child. But sometimes we forget where God found us. Sometimes we get so holy that we forget we ain't always been saved. Sometimes we forget that God didn't find us in the mourner's bench. He found us at the club. And we went praise dancing. We were twisting and shouting. And it wasn't on the goodness of the Lord. It was on Chubby Checker or some other rap group now today. And so we don't want to let our children know where the Lord really found us. It wasn't high and mighty. It was low down and gritty. And so here we are, though, now positioning ourselves, trying to forget that we were lost in the wilderness. And the Lord brought us out, but now we're back. Because we forgot who brought us over. So a mother in the wilderness will wander. But here's the other thing that I found in the text. While wandering, she will begin to worry. So a woman in the wilderness will wander in the wilderness and then begin to worry while she's in the wilderness. Look at the text. The water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs, and she went and sat her down over against him a good way, as if it were a bow shot, for she said, let me not see the death of my child. So she's worrying in the wilderness. But if you can I help you with the last thing here? That her wandering and worry has caused us to get to my second point. She weeps in the wilderness. Eventually, no matter how bad you are, you will cry in the wilderness. The record says that she sat over against him, lifted up her voice, and wept. She had been proud and arrogant. She had it all going. She had went back humble. But now she finds herself wandering in the wilderness, and the only thing she can do is sit down and cry. Children, there have been many nights that mama had set you down and said, now lay me down to sleep. Pray the Lord my soul to keep. Tucked you under, put the pillow under your head, turned off the lights, went into her room, sat down, and cried. Wondering what tomorrow was going to bring for her child. Wondering how she was going to feed her child in the morning. Wondering would they still have roof and rent. Wondering what God was going to do. A lot of times while we went down happy and glad, Mom could not see us dying and went over across town, sat down, and cried. A mother in the wilderness will have to cry sometimes. There's not a mother here who cannot say it. Sometimes she's had to go to bed with tear-stained eyes. And we who are here have to kind of understand that it's not because they don't care, but many times it's a loud expression of their grief. They're grieving on the inside, and oftentimes mother who are familiar with weeping because they weep for their children. They're just like the scripture in Jeremiah quoted in Matthew 2 and 18. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she would not be comforted. There are sometimes a mother cries for her child and just can't be comforted. Men can kind of man it up and move on, but sometimes a woman has to stay in travail. Woman has to stay in pain. And so anytime a woman or a wife is in the wilderness, men, we got to understand, in children, she will weep. She will cry at some point. Rachel will not be comforted. Mothers in here know about weeping in general. You know about what it is to cry. But they cry out of three things. She cries first out of one. The water is gone. He only gave her a limited supply. The water is gone. And many mothers have had to cry in the wilderness because there was no resolution to is gone and still hold on to my Christian integrity? How am I going to replenish the water and still walk like a woman who believes in God? How will I replenish the water and not lower my standards and become women of the world and creatures of the night? How can I live true to my principle when the water is gone? The water is gone, she weeps because she's in want. She's wondering what's going to happen. How will my needs be met? She has not read New Testament scripture in Philippians that said, my God shall supply all your needs according to his riches and glory. She does not have what you have, a word from the Lord. She does not have David yet because David has not yet been born. She does not have the Lord is my shepherd and I shall not want. She does not have what you have, a word. And so she weeps because she's in want. But she wants and weeps because she's worried. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. So when we are afflicted, we got to learn it's all right to weep, mothers. It's all right to cry. Even Jesus wept, but he did not weep out of worry because he knew what was going to happen. He wept out of love. And so sometimes, mothers, you ought to weep. Your child ought to see the tear. The Bible says in James 4:9, be afflicted and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to heaviness. The child ought to know this is serious business. And everything is not a laughing matter. There are certain things that we got to get serious about. That your salvation is on the forefront. Your integrity is on the forefront. Your morals are on the forefront. And we've got to learn. Sometimes in our weeping, what we have to do, she weeps. Because she's worried, she weeps. Because she wants, but then thirdly, she weeps because she can't watch. Any mothers here had to kind of turn their head because they couldn't watch what their child was going through? Any mothers here had to kind of steal away because they saw their child headed down a road of destruction and they just couldn't watch? Any mothers here just know the child is out there and cannot return. And it's not because you don't love the child, but you just can't go there and watch your child parade around the Parliament House. You just can't watch your child walk up and down OBT. You just can't watch your child coming out shackled and walking with chains. You just can't watch your child turning into a crackhead or a junkie. You just can't watch your child turning into a lazy bum with no kind of contribution to society. You just can't watch your child just dry up on the educational vine and not have anything. You have to turn. Or you just can't watch him die. She's weeping because she just can't see her son die. And in the midst of her weeping, she has forgotten that the Lord said his name is Ishmael. God hears. She does not have what you have. She does not have a Revelations word that says in Revelations 5:5, weep not, because the Lion of the tribe of Judah hath overcome. She does not have what you have. That you don't have to cry. There is one who can dry your weeping eyes. So let me tell you quickly and let you go to your dinner. 5 minutes and I'm out of here. What she says is that there's a mother in the wilderness. The mother's going to do two things. She's going to wander in her wilderness journey. She's going to weep while she's on the journey. But thank God the boy's name is God Hears. Because in the end, she's going to find worth in the wilderness. She's going to learn that she is not something that has been cast off and cast away. She's going to learn that God has more for her than just the wilderness journey. And somebody here needs to hear me today that you're in the wilderness now, but that's not where God wants you to remain. He's seen your weeping. He's seen your wants. He understands your worry. And all he's trying to do is get you to do the same thing that he wanted Hagar to do. He wants you to trust in the Lord with all of your might. He wants you to believe and not lean on your own understanding. He wants you to rise and acknowledge him in all your ways, and he will direct your path. Only God can direct you out of your wilderness. And so she's got it out. She's got it out because God had remembered what he told her. But can you examine the text and recognize that God had spoken to Hagar earlier? He had told her, you shall go back and humble yourself. And don't worry, no matter what goes on, God hears. And so since God had already told Hagar, if you notice in the text, he does not speak about Hagar's issue anymore. The text says she sat over against him, lifted up her voice, and began to weep. And the verse says in God 17, God heard the voice of the lad. In other words, he totally ignored Hagar. She's weeping, but God has already told her, I hear. She's weeping, but God has already told her, I will make a way. And so therefore, she's weeping, and God is saying, I've already told you what I needed to tell you. In other words, can I help somebody here today? You crying in the wilderness. But when God positioned you out there, he told you that I will supply your every need. You're crying in the wilderness, saying that there's no bread on the table, and the Lord has already told you that I never forsake you nor leave you. You're crying in the wilderness, and God have told you that greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. You're crying and talking about God won't hear you, but God already heard you. He's already given you the answer to what you need. And some of us mothers here ought to recognize that the answer he gave you way back then still applies to the wilderness of today. When he told you then, if you hold my hand, no man can take you out. When he told you, you may have to cry, but I will wipe the tear from your eye. When he told you that your weeping may endure for a night, but don't worry, joy will come in the morning. When he told you that the same God who watched over you will watch over your children, he's trying to tell you you're weeping in the wilderness, but I've already dried your tears, and so I don't have time. If you let me spiritualize the text, God is saying I don't have time to be redundant and repeat myself. I've already told you that I am God. I am your provider. I am your healer. I am your banner. I am your deliverer. I am your shelter. I am your comforter. I am your all in all. Who am I? I am whatever you need. And so God is saying, I don't want to be redundant, so I'm not going to hear you, Hagar, but you got something, you got somebody who don't know who I am. And because you weeping in the wilderness, you have not told your son that there is a God who can supply my every need. Because you crying over your worrying, because you crying because Sarah put you out, because crying because the water is gone. You have not taken time to tell your child, don't worry, don't fret, he's never failed me yet. You haven't taken time to tell your child, it may be dark in this wilderness, but Jesus is the light of the world. You have not taken time to tell your child, I've been mistreated from Abraham and Sarah, but yes, Jesus loves me. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. You crying, you weeping, you wondering, but you ought to sit down and tell your child, you don't have to worry, because I found work in the wilderness. I found somebody who looked beyond my fault and satisfied my need. I found somebody who said, we're wanderers now, but you have purpose and you have destiny, and your name, son, is God hears. So when you're lonely and when mama gone, God hears. When you're down and out, you just gone, God hears. When you don't know how you're gonna make it, he named you. God hears. Let me teach you a song. My son, I love the Lord. He heard my cry and pitied my every groan. Lord, as I live, why trouble rise? I'll haste to his throne. Why? Because God hears, and God answers. So stop weeping, stop moaning, stop wondering. Tell your child, live up to your name. God hears. You're in the wilderness, on your way to your promised land. Be there as it may. Be not dismayed. Whatever betide, God will take care of you. If beneath his wings, love back. God will. I know he will. I'm not a mother, but I'm a father, and I've tried when to tell God some praise. Come on.